Hello, good people. It is Todd Shannon, data scientist, social commentator, getter of buckets. And we have to ask ourselves a serious question, and that is anti Semitism a growing phenomenon in the Christian community? And more specifically, amongst the so called America First crowd. Now, there's a lot of assumptions kind of embedded into that question. And the first thing that is assumed by that question is that the America First movement is, in fact, Christian, right? You might have seen in the thumbnail that I had a little screenshot of Nick Fuentes, his Twitter or his X profile, where he's got America First, Christ is King. So we see this Christ is King, America First thing, right? We see them almost always conjoined, like a mantra, like they kind of go together. Peanut butter and jelly, even. But I submit to you that in some ways it could be true that anti-Semitism is growing amongst the Christian ranks, but also probably more likely and a more, I think, more robust explanation as to why we're seeing it is that this is kind of a pseudo-Christian movement. The America First movement in and of itself is fraught with a lot of problems. And I think that really America First is really just a thinly veiled anti-Semitic movement, to be quite honest. Somebody might say, well, you're overgeneralizing. America First really is about, getting out of foreign wars, making sure that we aren't sending any aid to overseas countries and everything. But there seems to be an inordinate focus amongst the so-called America First crowd on Israel and what we're doing in our interactions with Israel. So I do think that, in all fairness, a lot of people who have this America First mentality have that in mind, right? They really have in mind the idea that America should be taking care of Americans first and not just, doling out all this foreign aid and also letting our borders be overrun by immigrants, right? I understand that. Much like a lot of people who were of the BLM movement, who were in the BLM movement, really were concerned about racial injustice. But a good portion of them were really just communist Trojan horses trying to really overthrow our culture and our system of government with their communist garbage, with their Marxist nonsense. So in many respects, I've said this on other videos, I think that the America First movement is the new BLM. And I even showed you, I encourage you to go watch. Maybe I'll put a card here so you can go watch it. I don't want to rehash stuff that I've already gone over. But there's a video that I did and said, who are these America First people? And I showed that, unequivocally, that a good significant portion of them are really, they have this Christ is King, America First. They have this in their bio. They say it like a mantra. These people are 100% not Christians, completely unregenerate, and that's a fact. But I want to maybe touch on a couple things because there's a few things that I think is important to understand. And when we think about Nick Fuentes and the fascination with him, because he seems to be the face of this America First movement and this Christ is King thing, this group of community. And I came across an article by a gentleman named Rod Dreher. I don't know a lot about Rod Dreher. I know he is a professed Christian, but I think this is an interesting article that he wrote that I think we should read, because I think my opinion about why the Christ is King mantra has been adopted amongst the America First crowd is because America First, this anti-Semitism and in a lot of cases, a lot of racism, misogyny, like real racism and misogyny, you run the risk of sounding like a leftist when you start talking about racism and misogyny, because to the left, everything is racism and misogyny, right? But fake racism and misogyny doesn't negate real racism and misogyny and anti-Semitism. So the left has been kind of crying wolf all this time, and now they almost illegitimize any claim that that's actually going on, but that doesn't, there again, in this particular group, it is happening. So it is my claim that, and it's been my suspicion, that the real reason why Christ is King has become a mantra amongst the unregenerate America First right is because it's transgressive. And we're going to read something in this article that will, I think, kind of give some credence to that, because being transgressive is kind of their jam. It's something that they, for lack of a better term, get off on, right? They're all about it. That's why they like to say the N-word, because you're not supposed to say the N-word. So I'm going to say it even more. You're not supposed to call it anybody, I don't want to say it because I don't want YouTube to flag my video, but the word that starts with an F that refers to gay people, right? You're not supposed to, bash on the Jews, so they bash on the Jews. The whole thing is being transgressive, and rather than this being a real devotion to Christ, when they say Christ is king, this is just a rebellion against the left-wing establishment, because they have made their target for the last, umpteen years, the Christian white male. If you're a Christian and you're white and you're a male, you are at the top of the hegemonic hierarchy, and therefore you need to be targeted and taken down a peg, because we have to make way for the black, female, handicap, gay, tri-gender, lesbian, whatever, right? So the straight white male is the classic symbol of the oppressor. More specifically, the straight white Christian male, right? And so what else could be more transgressive than to embody all of the things that are antithetical to the left, while also saying, I'm a Christian, right? Even if you're not actually a Christian, it's just like saying, well, if being a Christian is the most transgressive thing that I can be, then that's what I'm going to be. So we're going to read a little bit of this article, and then I'm going to, this thing kind of takes a little bit of a split between Protestants and Catholics, which I think we need to explore. So let's have a quick look at this and see if we can get into it. I'm going to read this article directly because I got this article from this Dark Horse video that I watched. This is Brett Weinstein. They were reading pieces of the article, but I figured it's better to just go straight to the article rather than have them read it. So this is Rod Dreher. He says he's writing this article, and he says, the claim that I first floated in this space last week, quoting a DC insider who said that in his estimation, between 30 and 40% of the Zoomers who work in official Republican Washington are fans of Nick Fuentes. That's true. Was confirmed multiple times by Zoomers who live in that world. Interesting. So we're saying Gen Zers, Zoomers, 30 to 40% of these folks that work, Republicans working in Washington, are Nick Fuentes fans. Okay, this is interesting. If you think being Christian is some kind of vaccination against anti-Semitism, you're wrong. Even young Christians, especially trad Catholics, I learned, are neck deep in anti-Semitism. They even use it as a litmus test of who can and can't join their informal groups. Not every DC Zoomer con who identifies with Fuentes agrees with everything he says or the way he says it. What they like most of all is his rage and willingness to violate taboos. Now, this is what I was talking about. I've long since sensed this, that they have just this fascination with being, violating taboos, being transgressive. I asked one astute Zoomer what the Groypers actually wanted, meaning what were their demands. He said, they don't have any. They just want to tear everything down. Now, what I find interesting about this is, as well, is that in this video that I was watching with Brett Weinstein and his wife, what they were saying, this, in their estimation, they were saying how it kind of mirrored what they saw on Antifa. So basically, Antifa was kind of the antithesis of them, of the typical Groyper, Nick Fuentes fan, Zoomer. But Antifa, same generation, still Gen Z, but the left-wing version of that. And this mirrors exactly what I was saying in my video where I talked about who these America First people were. I said that they're the new version of Black Lives Matter, of BLM. What is BLM? I mean, who was kind of the enforcement arm of BLM but Antifa? So I like to say that I feel like that was discernment, and I feel like I was onto something. I feel like God really kind of opened my eyes to see that, and that this is not really a legitimate Christian group, but rather a group of people who are disaffected and dissatisfied with the status quo. And I'd like to say something. If any of the Nick Fuentes fans watch this video, I just want to say that one of the things that I've said and will continue to say is that the Groypers have a legitimate grievance when we think about how white Christian men have been targeted, have been ostracized, have been talked trash about. They even mentioned this in the article here. It says, moreover, they grew up in a country that had lost its common culture. Many of these young men are fatherless. Most of them spent their youth being told that as whites, and especially as white males, they are what's wrong with the world. Their own speech was policed by Stasi-like ruthlessness for racism and bigotry, while people on the left routinely slandered whites, males, Christians, and heterosexuals, and were even rewarded for it. This is 100% correct. This is 100% correct. People can talk reckless and say anything they want to about white people, especially white men, and then they got to tiptoe and walk on eggshells to talk about any other group. And this is why you see what Nick Fuentes has become is, and I'm going to do another video because I didn't, it was a couple years ago when Scott Adams wrote an article. Scott Adams, he's the author of the Dilbert, or the creator of the Dilbert cartoon. And people tried to cancel him a couple of years ago because he said he didn't want to be around black people anymore because there was a survey that came out that said black people don't like white people, or they don't, or the majority of black people don't want to be around white people, or something to that effect. And he said, I don't want to be around black people anymore because they don't want to be around me. And people tried to, clown him. Charlemagne the fraud gave him Donkey of the Day and all that stuff. But the truth of the matter is that that's a very natural and reasonable response to that sort of thing. I mean, it's not a Christian response, not a Christ-centered response, but it is for a person who doesn't have Christian ethics. They're not turning the other cheek or blessing their enemies. So that was very understandable. But this is a legit issue, right? They're not making it up when they say it's not right that people can take a dump on us and try to take a dump on white people, and at the same time we can't say anything. So this is what they like about Nick Fuentes. F that seems to be the reaction now, is what they said. Fuentes is a living, breathing illustration of what Hannah Arendt meant when she spoke of people willing to revel in transgression such that they tear down the pillars of civilization just for the fun of seeing those who had been gate-kept away breaching containment. So, I feel like that's a good illustration of what I was talking about, because at the end of the day, this really is about how this new generation, these Zoomers, are addressing their grievances and moving forward. What are we going to do about it, right? This is a growing sentiment. We do need to understand that America first. It's important to understand this. We have to be clear about this. America first, it's not a Christian movement. But the real issue is that amongst traditional Catholics, you see this on the rise, but then you see it also on the kind of the Reformed side of things, right? The Southern Baptists, or maybe some of the Presbyterians, some of that Reformed crowd, we see this sort of thing lining up, right? And the question is, this is something that I think that deserves our attention. I see on the Protestant side, we see a pushback that I think is appropriate. At least I see it. I think what we see that embodied in Charlie Kirk, for example, and the fact that Charlie Kirk was evangelical Protestant, he had a lot of those people around him. That's why he was a supporter of Israel. And we saw that he rejected the whole Nick Fuentes, Groyper movement. This is why there was such a stark contrast. Is because amongst Protestant pastors and teachers, there is not that anti-Israel sentiment. But I think we're starting to see a crack in that armor amongst a very small subset of those people because they are starting to become fans of the kind of the Nick Fuentes crowd. So the question is how we see this addressed a little bit more thoroughly on the left side of the other on one side of this aisle, on the Protestant side, but I'm really curious because I haven't really seen this thoroughly addressed on the Catholic side. I just haven't really seen it, and I think the staunch differences between Catholicism and Protestants here is being laid bare, and I think there's a broader question. There's a broader issue too, right? Where you have people like Candace Owens, right, who, she likes to wave the Catholic pom poms. She's Team Catholic. Same thing with Nick Fuentes, obviously. But even beyond the issue of Israel, there is some clear things about what, and there again, if you watch my video that I did, Who Are These America First People? You'll see that there's just some things that are just completely antithetical to Christian morality and ethics in general, right? And we generally see a rebuke of that on the Protestant side, and we haven't really seen that on the Catholic side. And I think it's a fair question. The question is that are Catholics okay with people like Nick Fuentes and Candace Owens being representatives of their faith? I really think it's a fair question to ask. And I think we also see this manifest in other areas where there is actually a lot more unity on the Protestant side when it comes to a lot of these social political issues. But I think we tend not to see it as much on the other side, right? We see that there's a much more splintering and much more disparate views on the Catholic side. And I think that has to do with the direct addressing of a lot of these issues. And I always ask myself, well, what does it mean to be a Catholic? Can you have any old view so long as you affirm, the major dogmas, right? So long as you affirm the Marian dogmas, the perpetual virginity, the Immaculate Conception, the things that really differentiate Catholicism from Protestantism. So long as you affirm those things, you can do things like Nick Fuentes, use the N-word with impunity, really, really have degrading and ungodly attitudes towards women, right? Not the fake leftism misogyny, but like real misogyny where he's like, women are pretty dumb, women are like children, that sort of thing. So just to illustrate what I'm talking about, when it comes to this difference between Protestants and Catholics, I want to show you this conversation that Ali Beth Stuckey had with Lila Rose some time ago, and because I thought it was informative.
The church has always been so clear on this or XYZ, whatever it is. And Protestantism has given way to division. And the Catholic Church is unified, but Protestantism, the fruit of it is this dissension and all of these denominations. And yet, when you look at statistically what professing Catholics say they believe and what professing Protestants say they believe, it seems to me, if we are to believe a Pew Research or something like that, that Protestants, when it comes to things like abortion, when it comes to things like homosexuality, statistically, we're a lot more united on this is what the Bible says, homosexuality is a sin, abortion is a sin and should be illegal, not just here, but also in South America. Whereas it's like 68% of Catholics, according to Pew Research, people who call themselves Catholics.
Well, I think that's the distinction.
Who are say that they're pro-choice. And so my question is, if like the Catholic Church is a bastion of unity, why are professing Catholics so disunified when it comes to these really big moral theological issues? It was like, I'll have to look it up. It was like 70% of Catholics believe that non-Christians can go to heaven, according to Pew Research. That's like huge.
Well, let's set that one aside for a minute, because it's like, what do you mean by a non-Christian going to heaven? Because God.
So you see that conversation between Lila Rose and Ali Beth Stuckey, and I mean, those are some pretty interesting statistics, right? We see anti-Semitism growing in Catholicism, and we also see it growing on the Protestant side with some of the Reformed folks. But I think there's a distinct difference is where we tend to see some of these moral, social, political issues routinely addressed in the Protestant church, even though there are different ways and different approaches to it. And there are, obviously, I'm not saying that there's not any division in Protestantism, but the central claim of many in Catholicism is the unity of Catholicism because of the centralized leadership and because of the office of the papacy and all of these things. But amongst the actual people who make up the body, who make up the lay people in the Catholic Church, there's much more disunity. And so the point is, the question is, how is Catholicism, how are they going to address having someone like Nick Fuentes, who I would imagine clearly is violating some standard of Christian ethics, even by Catholic standards? How are you going to address that? I'm curious to know, how can that be addressed, especially with there being so much disparity in political and social views that we see in the Catholic Church? And so I'm curious about that. I just thought that was an interesting perspective. It should be understood that in general, this is not a Christian movement. This is really a movement of disgruntled and disenfranchised young people who are using Christ as King as a badge of rebellion and not really as a true devotion to Christ. And I think that really is the takeaway, but I think that manifests in Catholicism and Protestantism a little bit differently. So I thought I'd point that out. But I'm curious to know what your thoughts are. If you're new to this channel, if you're new to Todd Thinks, I appreciate you stopping by. Please go ahead and like, share, and subscribe. Make sure you tune in next time. And if you see a hype button show up, that's a new feature on YouTube. It's for small channels and creators like myself. So if you hit that hype button, that pushes the video out to more people, gets more people involved and have an opportunity to see this content. So I appreciate you stopping by once again, my friends. Until next time, God bless you.